This week on Crunch Week, we're talking about Airbnb's new round of funding, Twitter's big acquisition of Gnip, and the controversy around transferring usernames in social media. Hi, welcome to Crunch Week. I'm Lena Rao.
I'm Colleen.
I'm Ryan.
Interesting week for news and some sort of late breaking news in the week. Airbnb's new round of funding. Our
It's
resident
closed.
Collaborative consumption expert Ryan.
It's closed. It's finally done. Airbnb has closed its $500 million round of funding, values them at $10 billion.
Wow.
And now they can take over the world. They're valued above like actual hotel chains right now, which is kind of interesting.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's good for them because they really want to be a hospitality company. So that's where they're heading into.
Yeah, they've made a lot of changes, especially over the last year or two, trying to reposition themselves, not as like a marketplace, but an actual global hospitality brand. And so this will allow them to continue doing that and, fighting the good fight for collaborative consumption, which is getting kind of interesting right now. In New York, they have been working to try to collect hotel occupancy taxes, and the New York hotel lobby says now that they don't want Airbnb to do that because it would kind of legitimize their business.
Well, that's not what the lobby says, though. What is the lobby's reason for not wanting Airbnb to collect this kind of tax after years of saying, Airbnb is not legitimate because they're not collecting the tax? Like, what is their official statement?
I don't know that there was an official statement. It had been reported, I think, by the New York Post. Someone within the hotel lobby group said, they're going to oppose any legislation in which Airbnb would be able to collect this tax. The same thing's happening in San Francisco right now. Legislators here basically put forward a bill which would sort of legitimize that and have them collect hotel occupancy tax in San Francisco. So, they're gradually moving that direction. It's just a question of how quickly it happens.
This collaborative consumption space is just crazy. I mean, $500 million.
And a $10 billion valuation.
At a $10 billion valuation. And I remember it wasn't even not much more than a year ago that Uber raised $250 million at a big valuation. And that seemed ludicrous at that time. It seemed like such a big round. It seems like an IPO amount of money, not a funding round amount of money.
Well, it's so interesting to see that they're kind of putting off the IPO in favor of like raising from these other institutional investors like TPG, which was the investor in the Airbnb round, and TPG was in Uber too. That's right, with the Google Ventures round. So it's really interesting to see these companies, raise $500 million. That hopefully should last them for a little bit of time, and obviously put off a public offering for maybe another year or so.
But I think they have to do that. They have to remain independent for as long as they can until the regulations or the regulatory risk
remain private
for as long as they can until they figure out the regulatory issues and they sort of get rid of that risk factor because public investors are not going to want to put money into that.
Oh, can you imagine? I mean, if some decision comes down and they're a public stock, imagine the value could sway. Speaking of value swaying, Twitter gained, I think, nearly $3 billion in its value this week with the acquisition of data fire hose company Gnip. So
Right. Gnip is this company that's had social data. It's been many years now that Twitter has only given access of its full fire hose of data to a handful of companies. Topsy was one, Gnip is another one. Topsy sort of recently was acquired by Apple, and so Twitter acquired Gnip. I think that this isn't too surprising of a move. I think that a lot of people have thought that this might happen at some point. But it's interesting to see that one player off of the market, because especially in recent years, Gnip has not only focused on Twitter data. They've also focused on other companies' data. I remember a couple of years ago, they partnered up with WordPress.
And Facebook, I think they had a deal with as well.
Right. So for this to go into the arms of Twitter, I think that we'll still wait to see how this is going to play out for the ecosystem. But a huge win for Gnip, and for, I believe they're based in Colorado.
Yeah.
Or either, yeah, and
so.
only raised like $6 million or something, and
Yeah,
then
and
to
the
sell.
acquisition was like around 200 million or so. That's what the report was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that from the perspective of why they gained that much, I guess market value was also because Gnip could be a possible revenue stream for them, and so I think investors are thinking, okay, well, like they have advertising, which is going okay, but their user growth is slowing, which we'll see what happens in the coming earnings for Q1. But I think Gnip could be, or selling that sort of data to other companies is probably going to be a big money, or a decent sized moneymaker for them.
I'm curious about two things. Number one, what happens to data access from these other sources, whether it be Facebook or Foursquare or whatever other fire hose Gnip is plugged into.
Yeah.
But also, it seems like Twitter is increasingly sort of becoming defensive about the folks that have access to their data. There have been reports, especially in the TV ecosystem, where Twitter is basically saying to data providers in that space, you can only work with us if you actually want our data. You can't work with Facebook to do that. And it became kind of an issue with companies, with broadcasters, frankly, who wanted that data from multiple sources. As Twitter was putting pressure on those companies.
These companies have established precedent. Years ago, Twitter was a lot more sort of open with certain parts of its data, or at least it allowed some third-party companies to have access to its full fire hose. And then as the years go on and there starts to be a little bit more pressure from the market to make sure that they're making money and have full control, then they're kind of capturing that same control. And I think that it's early, so they haven't gotten a lot of pushback from the larger community, but I'd imagine in the software community, the open source community, the social data, people who want social data to kind of be a lot more free, this is kind of an aggressive move from Twitter, and it might be leaving a bad taste in some people's mouths. I think in a lot of industries, if something similar to this happened, the equivalent of Twitter buying Gnip, that would be almost maybe a regulatory problem in certain industries.
Yeah, they said that, so Datamir is another sort of similar company to Gnip, and I think Datamir came out and said that, they're going to have their existing partnerships with Twitter, and there's sort of no loss of access, but I agree, there's definitely some regulatory angle there.
Yeah.
Well, I want to move on to our last story of the day, which is sort of just a general topic around controversy around switching usernames on social media. I have never switched usernames, but I know people that have. Well, it was all brought up because of an Instagram issue, right?
Yeah, this was all brought up this week. There was a post, a blog post from just a guy sort of in the tech industry that went viral this week on Medium, who said that he had woken up one day and he'd realized that his wife, whose name is Kathleen, she had the @Kathleen handle on Instagram. All of a sudden, he went to go tag her in a photo, and he realized that her Instagram name was now _ Kathleen. And he went to whoever
which kind of sucks.
Which is not the best username. @Kathleen is a much better one. And then he went to see who had the actual Kathleen username, and someone else had it. And lo and behold, it's actually an Instagram/Twitter employee.
Facebook.
Oh, I'm sorry. Gosh, yeah. a Facebook/Instagram employee. So the question is, why did Facebook and Instagram reappropriate this username? His wife wasn't the most active user of Instagram, but this kind of seemed a little bit sneaky.
I think, but I think it came out that the account had been dormant for however long. I don't think anyone actually knows how long the account.
I think they keep the data kind of private. Facebook and Twitter and Instagram,
right.
all sort of.
And this guy didn't personally say how long it had been dormant.
Yeah.
So I'd imagine it has been for at least months.
I mean, so the bigger thing is that this. It's kind of living in this world. Like, it seems like that's not that unusual for unused accounts to end up being reappropriated by, other people. There was a time, I don't think you can do it anymore, but there was a time where if you knew someone inside Twitter and there was an account that you had your eye on and no one had logged in for a certain amount of time, whether it's like 12 months or a year or 18 months or something like that, they could like sneak you the username.
Yeah.
And I know a bunch of people that have 2 or 3 letter usernames
Or
based
their
on
names.
their names,
Yeah.
based on their names or initials that got them that way.
Yeah, the
I know.
hookup. You
Yeah.
get hooked up from someone in
Yeah.
Twitter. If you were here in San Francisco in the tech industry, happen to know someone, you'd get the hookup.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's totally true. I mean, I definitely think it'll be interesting now as like more usernames get taken. Like there's nothing left. Like I was reading on Twitter yesterday, like, Chelsea Clinton, who's pregnant now, better get her username. Like that's like a standard thing to do now because it's really difficult to get them afterwards. Everything's been taken and more people are active on Twitter, so it's like they're not as dormant, I think, as they usually are.
I think seeing the uproar around what happened this week, because this post on Medium really went viral and everybody thought that it was so unfair and such, favoritism toward the Facebook employee. And that's interesting because, like you said, we personally know a lot of people who got their usernames that way by taking it from somebody who clearly wasn't really using the account and they got hooked up. But I think that as companies get bigger and maybe publicly traded, you would expect that they would now have different things in place. Like the hookup, I don't think that happens at Twitter anymore.
Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore.
And it's surprising it happened at Facebook.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Thanks for joining us and tune in next week.